I remember the weight in the air that morning, heavier than grief, heavier than silence. My brothers and I gathered in the lawyer's office, pretending we were there for clarity, but I knew we were there for something else. Control, power, the final word on what our mother left behind. Before we even sat down, I could feel it. His eyes, sharp with entitlement, his smile rehearsed like a man convinced of his victory. He leaned forward, voice calm but edged. Mom wanted everything 50-50. That phrase still lingers, like smoke after a fire. Tell me, have you ever sat in a room with family, knowing the truth in your hands could shatter every bond left between you? I kept quiet then, but not out of weakness. The letter pressed against my chest reminded me why I was there. Mother's voice still echoed in my ears. Don't let them twist my words. The silence broke when I slid the envelope forward. His smirk faltered. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't plan to speak first. In fact, after sliding the envelope forward, I thought I might let the silence do its work. But silence can't hold long in a family like mine. It cracks quickly, and in those cracks, old arguments rush back like water finding a path downhill. My eldest brother stared at the letter as if it were a weapon pointed at him. He didn't touch it. He just leaned back, folded his arms, and gave a laugh too thin to sound real. The younger one shifted in his chair, eyes darting between us, caught in the middle the way he always had been since we were kids. What no one said, but we all felt, was that this moment had been waiting for us for years. The funeral was only the stage. The office was only the setting. The fight had been rehearsed a long time ago in living rooms, in kitchens, and whispered complaints we thought no one heard. I watched my eldest brother's smirk settle into something more practiced. He was to control the story before it was written. And here I was, holding the one page he couldn't rewrite. The lawyer, a thin man with careful words, cleared his throat. "Shall we begin formally?" he asked, though his eyes kept flicking to the letter. He already knew it meant trouble. I nodded, but my brother shook his head. "We don't need all this formality," he said. "We already know Mom wanted it fair. She said 50-50. That's what she always said." The younger one stayed quiet. I could see the weight pressing down on him. He wanted peace, not war. He had always wanted peace. But peace built on silence never lasts. I had learned that from watching our mother live through years of small compromises that cost her more than anyone knew. I wanted to open the letter right then, to show them, to let her voice speak for itself. But my chest tightened with a question I couldn't ignore. If I opened it, would it fix anything? Or would it destroy what little was left of us? The memory of her voice kept me steady. She hadn't written those words lightly. She had called me into the kitchen late one night, long after the others were asleep, and told me she was tired of carrying secrets. "When I'm gone, they'll fight," she said, "and you'll be standing in the middle. Promise me you won't let them erase me." That promise burned in my mind now as my brother tapped the table with his finger, impatient, eager to end the conversation before it began. The lawyer opened his folder, but my brother cut him off again. "We don't need to drag this out," he said. "We're family. We can handle this without paperwork." I had to laugh, not out loud, but inside. Family? We hadn't been a family in years. We were people connected by blood, sure, but blood alone doesn't bind when resentment has been flowing longer than trust. The younger one finally spoke, voice low. "Maybe we should at least hear what's in the folder." That was his way of standing up, soft and half-measured. My brother waved a hand at him, brushing his words aside the way he always had. And just like that, I was back in our old house, watching them argue over who got the bigger room, who got the last piece of bread, who got Father's attention before he left us. I thought of how quiet Mom had been in those years, how she kept her head down, working, scraping by, making sure there was something left for us even when there was nothing left for her. And now here we were, ready to tear apart the last thing she left behind. I leaned forward. "We'll hear it," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. The lawyer gave a cautious nod and shuffled his papers. My brother's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he might stand and walk out, but he didn't. He sat there, holding his breath like he could control the room with silence. But silence, as I knew too well, couldn't hold forever. The paper rustled in the lawyer's hands, but my mind wasn't in that room anymore. It slipped back to the days right after the funeral, those hours when grief was supposed to hold us together but instead pushed us further apart. We barely spoke in those days. We moved around the house like strangers, one washing dishes, another pacing the hallway, the eldest taking phone calls with the door shut. It wasn't silence born of mourning. It was silence full of suspicion, everyone waiting for the moment when loss turned into calculation. I remember standing in the kitchen, hands around a mug that had gone cold. My younger brother walked in, stopped, then walked back out without saying a word. That was how thin. We couldn't even look each other in the eye. What struck me most wasn't the quiet but the avoidance. Nobody asked what the will said. Nobody asked if Mom had left instructions. They didn't have to. We all knew those questions were coming, but asking them too soon would have exposed just how much each of us was thinking about it. Have you ever been in a room where the unspoken truth felt louder than anything that could be said? That's how those days felt. At night, I'd lie awake hearing the floorboards creak as the eldest moved around the house. He was searching, though he pretended otherwise. Old drawers, closets, even the shoe boxes stacked in the attic. He couldn't resist checking. I never called him out on it, but I noticed. He was hunting for something that would back up his version of the truth before anyone else could put their hands on proof. One evening, I caught him slipping a key into the old desk drawer in the living room. That drawer had always been Mom's place for bills, receipts, and letters she meant to answer but never did. When I walked in, he closed it quick, muttered something about organizing. I didn't argue. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch, watching him grow uncomfortable. That was when I realized the fight had already started, even before the lawyer's office. He had already claimed the moral high ground in his mind, already decided he would be the one to tell us what fair looked like. The strangest part was how grief sat underneath all of this, like a hidden current. Sometimes I'd catch myself missing her so much that it hurt to breathe. Then I'd hear his voice, confident, dismissive, and the sorrow twisted into anger. I thought about the last words she said to me before the hospital stay. She was tired, sitting at the table with a pen in her hand. She looked at me and said, "You know how they are. Don't let them bury what matters." At the time, I didn't fully grasp what she meant, but now, in the days after she was gone, it rang louder with every passing hour. The younger one tried to bridge the gap. He asked me once, in a quiet voice, "Do you think she wanted it equal?" I could hear the hesitation in him, like he wanted me to say yes, just so he wouldn't have to think any harder. I shook my head. "I think she wanted it right, not equal." He didn't reply, just nodded slowly, as if the answer scared him. Looking back, that week felt like standing in a hallway with doors locked on both sides, nobody willing to open theirs first, everyone waiting for someone else to break the silence. And in my pocket, the letter sat folded, heavy with the promise I had made. It's strange how a single piece of folded paper can feel heavier than a box of bricks. That envelope sat in my jacket pocket for days, warming against my chest, as if daring me to reveal what was inside. And the longer I carried it, the more the silence in the house began to split into cracks. Every glance across the dinner table became a quiet interrogation. Every pause in conversation sounded like someone waiting for me to slip. They didn't know what I held, but they sensed something was out of balance. The eldest grew restless. He started speaking louder, declaring what he believed was fair before anyone asked him. He said things like, "Mom wanted us to keep this place together," or "She trusted me to handle the money." He never said how he knew. He didn't need to. The tone of his voice made it clear. He thought authority came naturally to him, like an inheritance he didn't have to earn. I didn't argue. I let him fill the room with his words while I studied the way the younger one shifted in his chair, eyes moving between us. He wasn't siding with anyone yet, but uncertainty has a way of pushing people toward the loudest voice. I could see that happening right in front of me. That night, I pulled the envelope from my pocket and placed it on the table in my room. My hands lingered on it, as if holding it tighter would stop me from opening it. Inside was Mom's voice, her choice, her final word. But once I showed it, there would be no undoing. Have you ever delayed opening something because you knew it would change the way people looked at you? That was me, staring at the flap of a sealed letter, like it was the trigger on a weapon. The following morning, I came downstairs to find the eldest standing at the front door, phone pressed to his ear. His words were sharp, clipped. Something about a bank, something about accounts being transferred. He lowered his voice when I entered, but not before I caught the phrase, "My mother's estate." That was the moment the decision made itself. If I stayed silent any longer, he would take everything for himself and dare the rest of us to challenge him. I called both of them into the living room that evening. The old clock ticked against the wall while I set the envelope down on the coffee table. My heart pounded so hard I thought they could hear it. "What's that?" the younger one asked, his voice cautious. The eldest smirked like he already knew. "Another receipt? You can't just dig through drawers and call it proof." I didn't reply. I slid the envelope across the table and said, "This is from her. She gave it to me before the hospital." The smirk faltered. He leaned back, crossed his arms, but his eyes locked onto the paper like he wanted to snatch it before I unfolded it. The younger one leaned forward instead, curiosity outweighing his fear. I opened it slowly, each tear of the paper sounding louder than it should have. My mother's handwriting covered a single page, steady but firm, as if she had written it knowing every word would carry weight. She had named me executor, not him, me. And she had written, in no uncertain terms, how she wanted her home, her savings, even her personal belongings to be handled. It wasn't equal. It wasn't neat. But it was hers. The room fell into a silence so thick it felt like the air itself stopped moving. The eldest tried to laugh it off, saying, "Anyone can write a note. That doesn't make it legal." But the shake in his voice betrayed him. The younger one stayed quiet, but his eyes told me what he was thinking. He believed it. He believed her words, even if it meant conflict. And me? I felt both relief and dread. Relief that her voice was finally heard. Dread because I knew this paper wouldn't end the fight. It would start it. You know, sometimes I wonder if people truly hear the words in front of them or just filter everything through their own expectations. That night, when I read Mom's letter out loud, I thought it would put an end to the guessing, but instead, it felt like I had just dropped a match onto dry grass. The eldest leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Executor doesn't mean owner. You don't get to play judge and jury." He tapped the table with 2 fingers, steady but forceful, as if trying to hammer his point into me. I wanted to reply calmly, but my patience was wearing thin. "It means she trusted me to carry out her wishes. This isn't about me taking anything. It's about honoring her." He laughed, short and cutting. "Convenient, isn't it? She just happens to make you the one in charge. And suddenly, you're the saint protecting her honor." The younger one shifted uncomfortably, caught between us. "We should talk it through. Mom wouldn't want us tearing each other apart." That line stung because he was right, but I also knew avoiding conflict wasn't an option anymore. I looked at both of them and asked, "What exactly do you think she wanted? The truth, or what makes you comfortable?" The eldest clenched his jaw. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I found myself replaying the argument in my head. The paper in my hand said one thing, but his voice kept drilling into me. Executor doesn't mean owner. I knew what the letter meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was already planning his next move. And sure enough, he didn't waste time. The very next morning, I overheard him on the phone again. This time it wasn't the bank, it was a lawyer. He was asking about contesting documents, about what it would take to challenge the will. I froze in the hallway, listening to every word, the pit in my stomach tightening. It wasn't enough for him to disagree. He wanted to rewrite the ending entirely. Have you ever felt that uneasy mix of anger and dread, knowing someone in your own family was willing to drag you through mud just to avoid facing the truth. That's exactly where I stood. When he hung up, I walked into the kitchen as if I hadn't heard a thing. He glanced at me, smirked, and said, "Better hope that letter holds up in court." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. That evening, I sat down with the younger one. I knew he was stuck in the middle, but I also knew he needed to understand what was at stake. This isn't about dividing furniture or splitting savings. It's about her word. If we let him bulldoze through it, we're saying her voice doesn't matter. He rubbed his forehead, sighing. "I don't want to fight him. He won't back down. You know how he is." "I know," I admitted. "But if we don't stand for what she wrote, then he'll win by default. Do you want her memory treated like that?" The younger one didn't answer right away. He just stared at the table, torn between keeping the peace and protecting the truth. By the end of the week, papers arrived at the house. Legal papers. My brother wasn't bluffing. He had actually filed to challenge the letter, questioning its validity. I held the envelope in my hands, the irony not lost on me. One envelope had carried her wishes. Now another carried his attempt to erase them. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just a fight over property or money. It was a fight over respect, over whose version of Mom's legacy would survive, and I wasn't about to let his be the final word. Funny thing about legal battles within families, they don't just test the strength of your case, they test the strength of your memory. Every word my mother spoke in those last months started circling back through my mind, as if she knew we'd end up here. I kept replaying those moments, trying to hold on to the pieces that mattered most. When I first sat down with the lawyer she had chosen, the man looked at me across his desk and said, "She was clear. She wanted you to oversee this. The letter won't erase conflict, but it will hold." It should have comforted me, but all I felt was the weight of what was coming. My brother wasn't bluffing anymore. He had turned her death into a battlefield. At night, I found myself drifting into long stretches of silence, staring at the empty chair at the kitchen table. I could almost hear her voice there. She always had a way of softening edges, of pulling arguments back before they turned to bitterness. Without her, we were adrift, and I wondered if she had seen this fracture coming all along. The younger one asked me one evening, "Do you think she ever imagined we'd fight like this?" I paused before answering. I think she knew exactly what would happen. That's why she left me that letter. Not because she trusted me more, but because she trusted I wouldn't give in when the rest of you did. He nodded, quietly. He didn't challenge it, but I could tell he still wished for a different reality, one where peace was possible. The hearings started small, just paperwork and appearances. But each time I walked into that courtroom, the air grew heavier. My eldest brother wouldn't even look at me. He'd sit with his attorney whispering, as if the rest of us weren't even family anymore. The younger brother and I stayed together on the other side, but his hesitation showed. He wasn't cut out for conflict. I knew he would have chosen silence if it weren't for the promise he made to stand with me. One moment still sits with me, clear as day. During one of the sessions, the judge asked if we wanted to attempt mediation instead of dragging this into a full dispute. My eldest leaned forward, sharp as ever, and said, "There's nothing to mediate. He's twisting her words." I wanted to shout, to stand up and fight in that moment, but instead I stayed seated. I remembered Mom's words, "Don't let them bury what matters." That was my anchor. Outside the courthouse, the younger one muttered, "He's never going to bend. He'd rather burn everything than admit he's wrong." I looked at him and said, "Then we'll see how far he's willing to go." Sometimes I wondered if this was what Mom had feared most, that after she was gone, her sons would no longer see one another as family, but as rivals. That thought haunted me more than the case itself. But there was also a strange clarity in it. I realized this fight wasn't about the house, or the savings, or even the letter. It was about dignity, about whether her voice carried meaning beyond the grave, or if it could be drowned out by the loudest argument in the room. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at her desk and opened the drawer she had always kept locked. Inside were small things, old photos, letters she never mailed, notes she had written to herself, and tucked at the very back, another envelope. This one wasn't addressed. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, she had written just a few lines. If they fight, remind them who raised them. Remind them love isn't equal shares. It's equal sacrifice. It wasn't a legal document. It wouldn't sway a judge. But it felt like she was speaking directly into my ear. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. That piece of paper might not carry the law, but it carried her heart, and I knew I'd need it before this was done. The first time I used the second letter, it wasn't in court. It was at the dining room table, the one where we had shared birthdays and holidays, the one that felt too empty without her. I slid the envelope across the wood toward my younger brother. He looked at me, puzzled, before opening it. His eyes traced the lines slowly. Then he leaned back, staring at me. She really wrote this? Yes, I answered. My voice was steady, but inside I was bracing myself. He didn't say anything right away. He folded the paper, set it back on the table, and whispered, "If you show this to him, he'll lose it. His mind." That was exactly what I was weighing. The court didn't need to see it. It wasn't binding, but it was truth. Plain as day, written in her hand. And once it was out, there'd be no turning back. The next hearing came faster than I expected. My eldest walked in sharp, purposeful, with his lawyer in tow. He didn't glance at me, but I felt the chill. His confidence was rattling, as though he believed the courtroom was his stage. The judge opened with the standard lines. Documents were presented, dates verified, signatures confirmed. My brother's attorney pressed the point again and again. The mother's wishes were unclear. My client believes assets should be divided equally. No exceptions. I kept my hand on my briefcase where her notarized letter rested, along with the second envelope. My turn came. My lawyer spoke calmly. "Your Honor, the decedent left a notarized letter. It clearly assigns authority and outlines specific divisions. We are not relying on memory. We are relying on her words, witnessed and sealed." The judge nodded. My brother stiffened. His lawyer leaned closer, whispering quickly. That's when I felt the weight of the second letter burning in my pocket. I didn't pull it out, not yet. Instead, I studied my brother. His jaw tightened, his shoulders rigid, but his eyes betrayed him. He was scared, even if he'd never admit it. After court, he finally spoke directly to me for the first time in weeks. His words weren't angry. They were cold. "You think you've got this locked up, but you don't know what she told me." I stared at him, measured. "Then why didn't she write it down?" He glared, then walked away, leaving the question hanging like smoke. That night, my younger brother called. His voice was low. "He's going to push harder. I can feel it." "I know," I said, "but we've got more than he does. She gave us the truth. We just need to decide when to use it." I didn't tell him I already knew when that moment would come. The next morning I sat at her desk again, staring at her handwriting on the second letter. It wasn't law, but it was love turned into words. If I revealed it in front of everyone, it might destroy what little chance of reconciliation remained. But if I kept it hidden, he would keep claiming she never chose, that she left us in confusion. I couldn't let that stand. The decision weighed on me through every step of the following week. At work, I barely registered conversations. At home, I drifted through rooms like a stranger. At night, I rehearsed what I would say when the moment came. On the day of the next hearing, I carried both letters in my case. The notarized one was our anchor. The personal one was my sword. When the judge asked again for final statements, my brother's lawyer spoke first, sharp and precise. "Your Honor, my client maintains that no notarized letter exists in proper legal form, and any alleged evidence produced today must be examined for authenticity." The courtroom fell quiet. That was my moment. I stood, opened my case, and laid the notarized letter before the judge. My lawyer explained its origin, the witnesses, the notary's seal. The judge examined it carefully. But I didn't sit back down. I reached into my jacket pocket and held up the second letter. This one is not notarized. It is not legal. But it is my mother's voice, and I want it read into the record. The room shifted. My brother muttered something under his breath, too low for the judge to catch. The younger one sat frozen, eyes wide. The judge hesitated. "You understand, sir, this letter carries no legal authority." "I understand," I said. "But it carries something greater. It carries intent." I unfolded a paper, my hands steady now, and read her words aloud. "If they fight, remind them who raised them. Remind them love isn't equal shares. It's equal sacrifice." When I finished, silence filled the room. For a moment, even my eldest brother didn't move. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. I looked directly at him, and for the first time since this began, his expression cracked. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to fear. The judge cleared his throat. "This letter, while not legally binding, speaks clearly to the character and values of the decedent. I will take it into consideration as I review the binding, notarized statement." I sat down slowly, feeling the weight lift. My brother didn't speak again that day. But as I left the courtroom, I knew it wasn't over. The letter had shaken him, but it hadn't ended the fight. If anything, it had drawn the lines even clearer. And deep inside I wondered, had I just honored her wishes, or had I shattered the last chance we had at being brothers again? There's a quiet truth about betrayal. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lingers like a cough that won't fade, showing up in conversations, meals, and the silence between words. By the time I reached this stage, I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. What I wanted was clarity, an understanding of why the people I raised, the family I trusted, thought I was disposable in my own home. That night, after another tense dinner, I sat at the end of the table with my tea untouched. My daughter avoided my eyes, her fiancé drummed his fingers as if waiting for me to leave, and the air carried the same heavy pause that had become routine. I decided I wouldn't sit in silence any longer. I set down my cup and asked, in the calmest tone I could manage, "Do either of you believe I'm less than family now? Because from the way things are going, that's how it feels." The fiancé smiled, not even pretending to soften his expression. "It's not about you being family. It's about moving forward. Times change. Maybe it's time you stepped aside." My daughter's lips pressed together. She didn't stop him. She didn't correct him. That silence told me more than words could. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. I thought about how many years I had put into building stability, saving for this house, filling it with memories. Now it felt as though every picture on the wall was being stripped of meaning. Was I holding on too tightly? Or had they simply stopped valuing what mattered most? Those questions haunted me, but they also lit a new kind of fire inside me. The next morning, I pulled out my folder of documents. The deed, the bills I had paid, the receipts that traced decades of commitment. I didn't bring them out to boast. I brought them out as a reminder, first to myself. I needed to see on paper that my sacrifices hadn't been invisible, no matter how much they tried to rewrite the story. When my daughter walked into the kitchen, I had the folder spread across the table. She stopped, her eyes flicking from the papers to my face. "What's all this?" she asked. "This," I said, tapping the deed, "is proof that I didn't just take up space. I built this life. Every corner of this house has my work in it. Before you think I'm a guest here, look at what kept this roof over our heads." Her face tightened, but she didn't argue. She only whispered, "Dad, I never said you weren't important." "Not saying it," I replied, "doesn't make the silence any less sharp." There are moments when silence carries more weight than shouting. Hers did, and what I saw in her eyes that morning was not guilt. It was calculation, as if she had realized that pushing me out wouldn't be as easy as planned. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just tension. It was a test of endurance, and I wasn't going to fail it. Over the following days, the fiancé grew bolder. He would make offhand comments about modernizing the house or using the space better. His tone wasn't casual, it was pointed. He wasn't talking about walls or furniture. He was talking about me. One evening, when he suggested turning my study into something useful, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the arrogance was so transparent. "That room," I said, leaning forward, "is where I wrote the letters that paid for your college. That desk bought you the education that lets you stand here today and call me useless. Be careful how you measure value. You might forget who laid the ground you're standing on." For the first time, his smirk faltered. He muttered something under his breath and walked away. My daughter followed him, but her steps were slower, heavier. She didn't defend him. She didn't defend me either. At this point, you might wonder why I didn't just leave, pack up my things, and find peace somewhere else. The truth is simple. Leaving would have been easy, but it would have been surrender. And after everything I had endured, I couldn't let them write the ending to my story. Not when I still had breath, not when I still had proof of my worth. The weeks dragged on, but something shifted. My daughter began spending more time alone. She'd stand in the garden staring at nothing or linger in the kitchen without speaking. One night she knocked on my door softly. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know how to fix this. He makes it sound like you're holding me back, but I know you're not." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough, but it was the first crack in the wall that had been growing between us. I told her gently, "The only person who can decide what's holding you back is you. But don't mistake the hands that built your future for chains. If you let him make that choice for you, you'll regret it long after I'm gone." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't speak again. She just nodded and left. That night, I realized the fight wasn't about me keeping the house. It was about me keeping my dignity. Every jab, every dismissal was an attempt to make me doubt my place. But dignity isn't something you sign away. It's lived, day by day, in choices and boundaries. The final spark came a week later. The fiancé had invited his friends over without asking and spoke loudly about eventual renovations. He gestured at the walls, the furniture, even my chair. My chair. I stood up in front of his friends and said clearly, "This house already has an owner, and it's not you." The room went quiet. His friends shifted uncomfortably. My daughter lowered her gaze, and for the first time, I felt the ground steady beneath me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had claimed my space. There comes a point in every conflict when patience stops being strength and starts becoming surrender. I had carried the weight of insults, endured the silence of my daughter, and watched her fiancé sharpen his words into weapons. But what they didn't realize was that I had been preparing piece by piece for the moment I would stop defending and start confronting. The shift came on a Sunday afternoon. My daughter had invited her fiancé's family over. They came in with the air of owners in waiting, glancing around as if the walls were already theirs. I noticed how the fiancé directed them, speaking loudly about future changes, as if I were invisible in the corner. I stayed quiet for most of it, watching. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. When one of his relatives asked, "So when will the transfer be official?" my daughter's face turned pale. She hadn't expected that question. She glanced at me, then at him, and in that glance, I saw it all. He had been whispering about the house as if it were already promised, building his image on the foundation of something that wasn't his. That question echoed in my mind long after they left. Transfer. The word lingered, sharp and deliberate. If he was already speaking as though ownership would fall into his hands, then he was bolder than I imagined. And if I didn't act soon, their silence might become signatures on a line I hadn't agreed to. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I wasn't reckless. I didn't ask for battles I couldn't win. But I wanted clarity. Legal, undeniable clarity. He reassured me that the deed was airtight, my ownership indisputable. No one could sell, transfer, or claim this house without my explicit consent. That reassurance didn't calm me. It fueled me, because now I knew the fiancé wasn't just careless, he was scheming. When my daughter came home later that day, I waited in the living room with the folder of documents spread across the coffee table. She froze at the sight, the same way she had before. "Sit down," I said firmly. She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the couch. "You need to hear me clearly. This house is not up for debate. It is not a bargaining chip, and it will not be transferred. If he's been promising otherwise, he's lying, not just to his family, but to you." Her eyes filled with panic, not because of my words, but because she realized I already knew more than she wanted to admit. I could have shouted. I could have blamed her. But sometimes the sharpest way to get through is not with noise, but with steadiness. And in that steadiness, I reminded myself I wasn't just speaking as a father. I was speaking as the man who built the very ground under her feet. Later that week, the fiancé tried to corner me in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter with a smirk, the same one he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. "You know, old man," he began, "it'd be easier for everyone if you just let go. Times are changing, and clinging to the past makes you look out of place." I looked him dead in the eye. "Out of place? This is my place. You're the one standing in a home you don't own, talking like you do. That smirk of yours won't change the truth. You're a guest here, a temporary one." For the first time, he didn't have a quick response. His lips twitched, his confidence cracked. He muttered something under his breath and left the room. That night, my daughter didn't sit by his side at dinner. She stayed quiet, but she stayed near me instead. I realized something then. This wasn't just about winning against him. It was about reminding her who had truly been there, who had never walked away. Betrayal hurts most when it comes from family, but it also carries a strange possibility, the chance to show what loyalty really looks like when tested. The final confrontation came sooner than I expected. One evening, after days of tension, the fiancé raised his voice in front of both of us. "This place is wasted potential. It could be something greater, something modern. Instead, it's stuck in the past, just like him." I stood slowly, steadying myself before I spoke. "You see a house as potential profit. I see it as a lifetime of work, sacrifice, and memories. That difference between us? That's why you will never own it." My daughter's head snapped toward him. For the first time, she looked at him not with agreement, but with doubt. "Is that what you've been planning?" she asked him. "Turning my home, my father's life, into some kind of project?" He tried to twist it, to spin his words into concern for her future, but she wasn't listening anymore. She turned back to me, her voice trembling. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how far he was taking it. I should have stopped it sooner." That apology didn't erase the weeks of silence, the pain of feeling unwanted, but it cracked open something I had thought was sealed forever, the possibility of rebuilding trust. And as I stood there, watching her finally separate her voice from his, I knew the story wasn't ending here. It was shifting. I told her calmly, "You don't need to apologize for his mistakes, but you do need to decide who you're standing with. Because if you let him speak for you, then you'll lose more than this house. You'll lose yourself." Her tears spilled, and for once, she didn't try to hide them. She left the room, not with him, but alone. He followed her, but his steps were frantic, desperate. I stayed behind, steady, the weight of years still on my shoulders but no longer crushing me. For the first time in weeks, I felt I had drawn a line they couldn't cross without consequence. Now I don't know what choices she'll make in the days ahead. Maybe she'll see through him completely, or maybe she'll try to hold on to both worlds. But I know one thing. I'm no longer silent, no longer passive, no longer invisible in my own home. The house may not be perfect. It may creak with age. Its walls may hold shadows of the past, but it is mine. And in claiming it, I claimed more than property. I claimed dignity. I claimed presence. I claimed the right to stand where I belong without apology. After that night, the air inside the house felt different, quieter, heavier, as if every room was listening, waiting for the next move. My daughter avoided me for 2 days, slipping in and out of the house with little more than a glance. Her fiancé, though, seemed restless, pacing, whispering to her, trying to hold on to ground he was quickly losing. I didn't chase either of them. I had said my piece, drawn my line. Now I waited to see where her loyalty would land. Sometimes silence isn't retreat. It's the space that forces people to reveal who they really are. On the 3rd evening, she came into the living room where I was reading. She sat down, fidgeting with her hands. I didn't look up right away, but when I finally did, I saw it. She was torn, the weight odd, of 2 worlds pulling at her chest. "Dad," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I closed the book and waited. Her voice carried both guilt and fear, the kind of tone I hadn't heard since she was a child caught hiding the truth. But this wasn't about stolen candy or missed curfews. This was about her future and mine. She admitted that her fiancé had been pushing her to convince me to sign papers. He had spoken with his relatives, hinted at renovations, and even mentioned potential buyers. He wanted her to frame it as protecting my retirement, as if I didn't know how to manage my own life. I listened without interruption. Every word confirmed what I had already suspected, but hearing it from her, in her own voice, changed something. She wasn't just caught in his plans. She had been pressured, cornered, persuaded by someone who knew exactly how to pull her strings. When she finished, she looked at me with tears forming in her eyes. "I didn't stop him. I let him talk about this house like it was his, and I stayed quiet. I'm sorry." I let the silence sit between us for a moment. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Do you see it now? Do you see who he really is?" She nodded slowly. But a nod wasn't enough. Words fade easily when fear returns. I knew the real test was coming, and it wouldn't be quiet or polite. He wasn't the kind of man to walk away without a fight, and I braced myself for the storm that would follow. It didn't take long. That same week he confronted me in the kitchen again, only this time with no smirk. His voice was sharp, desperate. "You're poisoning her against me. She's mine, not yours. You think she's going to stay by your side forever? She has a future with me. You're just an old man holding her back." I set my coffee cup down slowly and looked at him. If her future depends on stealing from me, then it isn't a future worth having. And if you need to tear her away from her father just to feel powerful, then you've already lost her. He clenched his fists. Didn't swing. He wanted control, not consequences. Instead, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. My daughter, who had been listening from the hallway, came in after he left. Her face was pale, her voice shaking. "Dad, I think I've been blind." I didn't answer right away. Some truths people need to say out loud for themselves before they can act on them. The next morning, she sat with me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. She told me she had ended things with him. No raised voices, no drawn-out fight, just a decision, spoken plainly. "This isn't right. I can't do this." I saw the relief in her shoulders as she said it. For the first time in weeks, she looked like my daughter again. But endings, even the right ones, come with aftermath. His family called her, tried to shame her, accused her of throwing away security. He left angry messages, some pleading, some threatening. I told her not to respond, not to engage, because men like him thrive on dragging people back into the fire. One evening, she sat beside me and asked, "Do you think I'll ever be free of this? Or will he always haunt me?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Freedom isn't about him forgetting you. It's about you remembering who you are without him. That's the only thing he can't touch. Her eyes filled, but this time the tears weren't just from regret. They were from recognition. And in that moment, I realized something about myself too. This battle wasn't just about the house or inheritance. It was about me refusing to be erased, refusing to let my years of work and sacrifice be rewritten by someone who had contributed nothing. In standing firm, I had shown her not just who he was, but who I still was. That night, we sat in the living room together, no words needed. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like peace slowly returning, one fragile piece at a time. The storm wasn't fully gone. He might try again, his anger still fresh. But I knew that the tide had shifted. My daughter had chosen, and though trust between us had been bruised, it wasn't broken beyond repair. I leaned back in my chair and let the weight of the moment settle. Betrayal had cut deep, but resilience had carried me through. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like the house, my house, was no longer a battleground, but a home again. A week passed in quiet tension. My daughter and I had settled into a routine, but the calm felt fragile, like frost on the edge of a window pane ready to crack. We spoke openly, shared meals, and I tried to read her expressions, hoping to catch any lingering shadow of doubt. Sometimes she laughed softly at a memory of the old days, and for a moment it felt like life could actually return to normal. Yet I knew that peace was temporary. He was still out there, still scheming, still convinced that his plans could be salvaged. I had seen it in the set of his shoulders and the way he had lingered in the hall the day before, as if the walls themselves belonged to him. That thought alone made my chest tighten. I started spending more time in the office, going through papers, letters, old documents from my mother's estate, just to be sure everything was in order. I wasn't a paranoid man, but after the confrontation, trust didn't come easily. Every signature, every notarized page, every piece of correspondence felt like a small anchor against a rising tide of chaos. Late one afternoon, she came to me holding a stack of letters she had intercepted. Messages from him, carefully drafted to pull her back into his world. She looked at me with those wide, vulnerable eyes, and I felt a strange mix of protectiveness and anger. "Dad, I didn't open them at first, but I think you should see what he's saying." I took them slowly, flipping through each one. He tried everything: charm, guilt, promises, threats. He attempted to turn her against me subtly, suggesting that I didn't understand her, that I was blocking her happiness, painting me as a villain in a story only he could tell. I handed the letters back, my hand steady. It's important you see how he manipulates, but you also have to recognize that the power to decide your path is yours alone. No one can take that from you without your consent. She nodded silently, and I could see comprehension slowly replacing fear. The realization that she had been played, not just coerced, but carefully maneuvered, was a bitter pill, yet it freed her. That evening, the confrontation arrived. He knocked on the door sharply, and I opened it. Seeing his face twisted with frustration, he tried to enter, but I stepped in front of the doorway. "This house isn't yours," I said plainly. "You're not welcome here." His eyes narrowed. "You think you can keep her from me? She's mine, not yours. You've got no right to tell me where I can go." I didn't flinch. "Her choice isn't yours to dictate. You can leave right now, or I call the authorities. Your threats have no weight here." He hesitated, the anger in his eyes giving way to confusion, and for the first time I sensed that he wasn't in control. Control had shifted, and he could feel it. Slowly, he backed down, muttering under his breath, and left. After he left, my daughter and I sat together, holding our hands across the kitchen table. I didn't need to say much. The absence of danger spoke louder than any words could. We both felt it, the solid weight of reclaimed dignity, the quiet affirmation that we had not been defeated. She leaned against me and whispered, "I finally understand what you meant, Dad. He can't control me anymore, and I don't have to let him. Thank you for standing firm, even when it was hard." Her words hit me in a way that no argument or confrontation ever could. They were simple, yet they carried the gravity of weeks of tension, betrayal, and fear. "You can see it," I replied, "but I need you to understand, this isn't about who controls the walls. It's about honoring Mom's wishes and protecting what's rightfully ours." He nodded slowly, eyes flicking to my daughter, who gave him a small, cautious smile. There was a quiet acknowledgement in that glance. He would have to tread carefully. Inside, we walked through the rooms together. I explained how each detail had been managed, the notarized letters, the careful documentation, and the decisions made to uphold Mom's intentions. As we moved, I noticed the shift in my brother's demeanor. His initial hesitancy softened into attentiveness. He asked questions, and I answered without defensiveness, only clarity. It was a dialogue we hadn't had for years, one that had been buried under resentment and miscommunication. By the time we reached the living room, I realized he was listening, really listening. The weight of the past seemed to settle between us like dust finally falling to the floor. He admitted that he hadn't understood the full scope of Mom's wishes, that he had assumed things would be handled differently, perhaps in ways that benefited him more than they should have. There was no dramatic apology, no tearful confession, just a quiet recognition that our family's legacy was more important than personal ambition. I turned to my daughter. This house, these documents, all of it, it represents more than walls or money. It represents our family, our history, and the trust Mom placed in us. That's something we can't compromise. She nodded firmly, and I could see a spark of pride in her eyes, knowing that we were standing together not just against external threats, but against the complacency and misunderstandings that had clouded our family for too long. We spent the next hour going over old family journals and letters, sharing memories that had been long forgotten. My brother, her, usually reticent, began to speak about moments he had overlooked, moments that had shaped us all. Listening to him, I realized that reconciliation wasn't about erasing past grievances. It was about acknowledging them and finding a way forward. By the time he left, there was a sense of calm resolution in the air. The tension that had haunted the house was gone, replaced by a fragile but genuine understanding. We hadn't solved every argument, but we had reclaimed our ability to communicate and to honor Mom's wishes. Later that night, I walked through the empty halls alone, feeling the quiet pulse of the house. The walls seemed to breathe differently now, free from manipulation, free from the subtle threats that had lingered for weeks. I paused in the study, placing my hand on the desk Mom had once used. I felt her presence there, not as a ghost of conflict, but as a reminder of what truly mattered: clarity, dignity, and family. My daughter joined me quietly, her hand brushing against mine. "Dad," she said softly, "I think I understand now. Protecting this house isn't just about ownership. It's about protecting ourselves and each other. We've done that, haven't we?" I smiled, a warmth spreading through me. "Yes, we have. And that's worth more than any argument, any manipulation, or any threat that comes our way." By the end of the evening, the house felt fully reclaimed, not just physically, but emotionally. Our family legacy had been restored, and the lessons learned went beyond property or documents. They were lessons in resilience, trust, and the quiet power of standing firm for what is right. And as I turned off the lights that night, I knew that we had established a foundation that would guide us through whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning air felt heavier than usual, carrying the subtle tension of anticipation. I paced the living room, papers in hand, thinking about the confrontation that had been quietly building over the past weeks. My brother had left with a tentative truce, but I knew the final confirmation of Mom's wishes would be the real test. Today, I would meet with the family lawyer to finalize the execution of the notarized letter and ensure that there could be no further manipulation. Each step toward that office felt measured, deliberate, as though the weight of responsibility itself was a physical presence. My daughter trailed behind me, her hands clutching her notebook. She had been through this journey with me, and now her confidence had grown alongside mine. "Do you think he will accept everything?" she asked quietly, her voice more steady than I expected. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I considered how much of our family's history had been twisted by assumptions and unspoken grievances. Perhaps acceptance wasn't immediate, but adherence to Mom's explicit wishes was non-negotiable. The office door opened and we were greeted by the lawyer's calm, deliberate tone. "We've prepared everything as per your mother's instructions," she said. The papers lay on the table like a map of what was rightfully ours. But then, the sound of the elevator brought a sudden awareness. My brother was approaching again. He entered with a careful step, carrying the weight of both curiosity and concern. His eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of hesitation that revealed more than words could express. "Sit down," I said, gesturing toward the chairs. "This is final. I want you to understand everything before we proceed." The lawyer began explaining the terms, but it was clear my brother had already glanced through the documents, noting the meticulous clarity. There was no ambiguity, no room for argument. I watched his face as he read, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement crossing his features. I took a deep breath, thinking back to the countless nights spent organizing letters, securing notarizations, and ensuring that every detail aligned with Mom's intentions. It hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where I feared the fight would be endless. But standing here now, seeing him confronted with undeniable truth, the effort felt justified. My daughter's presence beside me reinforced that this wasn't just about me. It was about preserving the integrity of our family legacy. He finally looked up, eyes meeting mine directly. I didn't know she wanted it this way," he admitted. There was a quiet pause, and in that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. No manipulation, no false statements, just acknowledgement. It was more powerful than any argument or confrontation. I realized then that sometimes the simplest truths carry the heaviest weight. "Mom made her wishes clear long ago," I said softly but firmly. "These documents ensure her voice is honored. It's not about who wins or loses. It's about respect and trust." My brother nodded slowly, processing the reality that had been carefully documented and thoughtfully executed. For once, there was no deflection, no subtle maneuvering, just recognition of the undeniable facts. After the meeting, we returned home. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the rooms that had once felt tense and unsettled. I wandered through the spaces, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was not boastful but quiet and deeply satisfying. Mom's legacy was intact, her wishes respected, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the constant weight of potential betrayal pressing down. Later, my brother pulled me aside privately. "I was wrong to assume anything," he said quietly. "I see now why you insisted on the notarized letter and the meticulous documentation. I'll follow through as she wanted." There was no anger, no defensiveness, only sincerity. I nodded, realizing that the confrontation I had feared for so long had become a moment of resolution. My daughter smiled at me across the room, and I let a wave of relief wash over us both. "We did it," she whispered. "We protected her wishes and made sure nothing could be twisted against us." I reached for her hand, feeling the quiet strength that had grown between us over these weeks. It was more than victory over a potential conflict. It was empowerment, dignity, and respect restored. As night fell, the house felt lighter, freer, as if every step of struggle and preparation had cleared the air of tension. There was still work to be done, documents to file, and reminders to ensure no future misinterpretation, but the hardest part was over. The final confrontation, handled with clarity, patience, and adherence to Mom's explicit instructions, had restored the order and dignity that the house and our family deserved. After the confrontation with my brother, a strange calm settled over the house. It wasn't the carefree kind of peace one expects after a storm, but a quiet acknowledgement that the core of our family conflict had been addressed. Still, there were lingering shadows, subtle reminders that even after clarity, relationships take time to heal. I found myself moving slowly through each room, remembering moments with Mom and her insistence that everything be fair, everything 50-50. Those memories were bittersweet, combining relief with the reality my daughter stayed close, as though sensing my need to process everything internally. "Do you think this will really change him?" she asked softly. I paused, considering how long it had taken for even the smallest acknowledgement of truth to sink in. My brother's hesitation and eventual acceptance proved he could recognize reality when faced directly, but that didn't mean old patterns wouldn't surface again. I realized that patience would be just as important as documentation in shaping the future of our family dynamic. Later that afternoon, a phone call broke the quiet. It was a distant cousin, someone who had stayed largely neutral during the disputes but had been quietly observing from the sidelines. Their tone was hesitant, a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I heard everything has been settled," they said. "Are you sure it's final?" The question carried more weight than expected. It reminded me that family conflicts rarely exist in isolation. Rumors, doubts, and second-guessing could continue to ripple outward even after formal resolutions. I explained calmly that all legal documentation was complete, that Mom's wishes had been clearly executed, and that there was no ambiguity left. Still, I could sense the cousin's unease. "People rarely accept finality quickly," I said, almost as a reassurance to myself as much as to them. "Even in families where fairness is established, emotions can linger, interpretations can differ, and misunderstandings can emerge." That awareness kept me vigilant, prepared to address any challenge that might arise from old assumptions or new insecurities. By evening, the house had shifted in subtle ways. The air felt lighter, but I knew we were still navigating uncharted emotional territory. Conversations that had once been tense now included pauses, measured words, and small gestures of acknowledgement. My daughter laughed quietly while preparing dinner, and I realized that these little moments of normalcy were the truest indicators of healing. They showed that while the confrontation had resolved the legal and ethical questions, the emotional restoration required ongoing care and attention. Just as I began to feel the first hints of relief, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was plain, unmarked, but it carried an unmistakable weight of anticipation. I opened it carefully, expecting perhaps another family inquiry or an unrelated administrative note. Instead, it contained a short message from an old family friend who had witnessed Mom's wishes firsthand. Their words confirmed that our approach had been aligned perfectly with her intentions and that any lingering dispute could be quelled by reference to their testimony if needed. The letter was a small but significant reassurance, underscoring the importance of both preparation and verification. Later, my brother approached me privately once more. "I want to be honest with you," he began. "I feel differently now. I realize how much effort you put in, and I see the importance of honoring Mom's choices. I want us to move forward without lingering resentment." His tone carried a cautious sincerity that hadn't existed before, and I recognized the early stages of genuine reconciliation. This was a moment that no notarized document could enforce. It was a choice, a conscious decision to rebuild trust. Sitting quietly that evening, I reflected on the journey we had undertaken. Months of uncertainty, preparation, confrontation, and verification had led to this tentative peace. I recognized that family conflict rarely ends neatly. It requires patience, vigilance, and consistent action to ensure that resolutions are respected over time. Yet, for the first time, I could see a path forward, one where respect, clarity, and intentionality guided our interactions rather than assumptions, misunderstandings, or unspoken grievances. The following day brought another unexpected visitor, a neighbor who had known Mom for decades. Their presence was a reminder that the consequences of our actions extended beyond immediate family. They shaped perceptions, community relations, and the legacy Mom had left behind. We spoke briefly, exchanging recollections of Mom's clarity, her insistence on fairness, and her desire for family unity. Their acknowledgement reinforced that our efforts were not only valid but essential to preserving her memory and the integrity of her decisions. In the quiet moments that followed, my daughter and I shared a long conversation about resilience, family responsibility, and the importance of setting boundaries. We discussed how the journey had strengthened our relationship, teaching us both about the complexities of trust, the weight of accountability, and the power of patience. It was a dialogue grounded in experience, not theory, and it helped solidify the lessons we had learned through confrontation and careful execution of Mom's wishes. As night settled fully, the house felt transformed, not magically, but in the subtle ways that mattered most: the restoration of dignity, the acknowledgement of truth, and the creation of a foundation for healthier relationships moving forward. There were still challenges ahead, subtle tests of patience and understanding, but we had the tools, the clarity, and the intent to navigate them. I realized that the resolution was not an endpoint, but a beginning, a chance to rebuild trust, honor legacy, and shape a future grounded in fairness and respect. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and quiet, almost like a gentle reminder that life continues after conflict. I moved slowly through the living room, noticing how the space had changed, not physically, but in the intangible ways that only family presence could alter. My brother had spent the night in reflection, I knew, and even in silence, there was a subtle acknowledgement that what had happened yesterday had shifted something fundamental between us. It wasn't complete closure, not yet, but the first traces of understanding were visible in gestures, glances, and careful words. I found myself thinking about Mom, her insistence that fairness be maintained in all things, and how her presence still influenced our actions. She had known that conflicts over inheritance could fester into long-term bitterness, and her instructions had been designed to prevent that. Now, watching my family navigate this resolution, I realized that her foresight extended beyond legal documents. It had shaped our emotional readiness to confront difficult truths. I wondered if she had anticipated this exact moment, where acknowledgement and patience converged to allow reconciliation to begin. Later that afternoon, a few neighbors stopped by. Their tone was cautious, curious, yet supportive. They asked questions about the property, about Mom's wishes, and about how we had managed to maintain civility through months of tension. Each inquiry felt like a small test, a subtle way to measure whether the harmony we had fought for was genuine or temporary. I answered carefully, highlighting the importance of documentation, but also emphasizing the emotional work that had been required. Their nods and quiet smiles reassured me. This resolution wasn't just internal, it was recognized and validated by those who had witnessed our family dynamics from the outside. My daughter lingered nearby, listening intently to the exchanges, occasionally offering her perspective on how patience and communication had softened old resentments. "It's like Mom prepared us for this," she said thoughtfully. Her words reminded me that the next generation carries forward not just material inheritance, but values, approaches, and relational strategies. Our ability to model fairness and intentional resolution would echo in her actions for years to come, shaping how she navigated her own relationships. By evening, I found a quiet moment on the porch. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the yard. I reflected on the months of preparation, the notarized letters, the conversations, the quiet tension that had accompanied every visit and phone call. In hindsight, every small effort, every cautious step toward clarity had built the foundation for the reconciliation now unfolding. The experience reinforced that family conflicts are rarely resolved through force. They require foresight, patience, and a willingness to hold space for truth. The day ended with an unexpected phone call from a distant aunt who had rarely involved herself in family matters. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly, expressing relief that the situation had been addressed. "I wasn't sure how this would end," she admitted, "but seeing you navigate it with care and clarity gives me hope for the future." Her words carried a subtle weight, as though she had been silently holding her breath for months. It reminded me that family dynamics extend beyond the immediate household, and that our actions reverberate through the broader network of relationships. I spoke with my brother privately again, feeling a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. "I never realized how much this weighed on both of us," he said quietly. "I want to move forward differently." We discussed boundaries, mutual respect, and the importance of ongoing communication. It was a conversation grounded in the practical realities of family life, not abstract ideals. We agreed that while documents and legal clarity provided structure, the human element, patience, understanding, humility, would define whether this reconciliation truly lasted. As night deepened, I reviewed the events of the past days, recognizing the interplay of preparation, confrontation, and reflection that had shaped the outcome. Every gesture, every carefully considered word, had contributed to the emergence of a fragile but genuine understanding. I realized that resolution is rarely instantaneous. It is cumulative, built through deliberate acts, emotional honesty, and the willingness to face discomfort without retreat. The journey had not only restored fairness in terms of property, but had begun to restore dignity, respect, and trust within the family. A final text arrived from an old family friend, a brief note expressing admiration for how we had handled the situation. "It's rare to see fairness executed with this level of patience and clarity," they wrote. The message was small but meaningful, a reminder that our choices and efforts resonated beyond immediate circles. It underscored the truth that legacy is not simply about assets, but about how we honor intentions, manage conflicts, and model integrity for those who will inherit not just property, but the lessons embedded in how we handle life's challenges. My daughter joined me on the porch, and we sat in silence for a while, letting the day's events settle around us. "I think we learned more than we realized," she said softly. I nodded, appreciating how even in conflict, growth is possible. She understood that resolution involves more than legal clarity. It requires patience, emotional engagement, and a willingness to acknowledge the perspectives and feelings of others. That understanding would shape how she interacted with family, friends, and even strangers in the years to come. As the night drew to a close, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The house had shifted subtly, but profoundly. There was recognition, respect, and an emerging sense of unity, fragile yet promising. I knew challenges would continue, moments where patience and communication would be tested. But the tools we had developed, documentation, honesty, careful listening, and deliberate reconciliation, would guide us. The journey of addressing Mom's wishes had not only clarified our responsibilities but had also illuminated a path toward stronger, more intentional family relationships. The morning air was crisp, carrying a hint of spring as I stepped outside to the garden. After days of reflection, confrontation, and cautious reconciliation, today felt like the day when everything might finally settle. I had reviewed every document, every conversation, every interaction leading up to this moment, and yet a quiet tension lingered. Even with the notarized letters in hand and Mom's wishes clearly outlined, the emotional stakes remained high. Family conflicts leave invisible marks and the echoes of past misunderstanding. GS could still surface if we weren't careful. I called my brother into the sunlit kitchen, gesturing toward the paperwork we had reviewed so many times. There was a pause as we both considered the weight of what was being resolved. In that silence, I saw him wrestling with his pride, his memories of past grievances, and the desire to honor Mom's wishes. I realized that legal clarity could only do so much. The rest relied on our ability to forgive, communicate, and genuinely step into the other person's perspective. It was the culmination of all the quiet preparation, late-night reflections, and deliberate honesty that had brought us here. As we began the formal review, neighbors and distant family members who had witnessed the tension trickled in. Their presence added an unexpected layer of scrutiny, but it also reinforced the sense that this resolution mattered beyond our immediate household. Questions were asked, clarifications sought, and every response had to balance legal accuracy with emotional tact. I could sense my brother's initial defensiveness softening, replaced by an emerging willingness to engage fully and openly. The moment felt fragile, yet profoundly hopeful. During a quiet pause, my daughter leaned over and whispered that she was proud of how we were handling the situation. Her voice carried the weight of observation, understanding, and expectation for the future. I felt the responsibility of modeling fairness and integrity, not just for her, but for the entire extended family. Every word I spoke now, every gesture I made would leave a lasting impression, shaping not only the immediate resolution but also how family disputes might be approached in generations to come. Mom's instructions had always emphasized equality, transparency, and the importance of honoring relationships above material gain. Seeing her vision executed today brought a mix of relief and nostalgia. I remembered moments from my childhood when fairness had been a guiding principle in our home and how deviations from that principle had caused small fractures over time. Now, decades later, those lessons proved critical. The notarized letter wasn't just a legal tool, it was a manifestation of values that had been carefully cultivated and passed down. Just as we neared the final signatures, an unexpected question arose from a distant cousin regarding a minor property detail. For a moment, the tension returned, a reminder that resolution is rarely straightforward. I took a breath, answered honestly, and referenced the documents that had been meticulously prepared. The cousin nodded, seemingly satisfied, and a collective exhale passed through the room. It was a small but meaningful confirmation that transparency and patience could withstand scrutiny, and that emotional equilibrium was as crucial as legal clarity. I turned to my brother, who finally met my gaze fully, without hesitation. "I understand now," he said, his voice steady but imbued with emotion. "Mom wanted this, and I see why it matters. I'm ready to move forward." His words were simple, but carried profound weight. They symbolized not just agreement with legal instructions, but a willingness to repair trust and prioritize family harmony over lingering resentment. It was a turning point that felt both delicate and definitive. Later, as everyone began to leave, I lingered in the quiet of the living room. The house felt lighter somehow, imbued with an unspoken acknowledgement that a significant conflict had been addressed and partially resolved. I thought about the months of preparation, the moments of confrontation, and the deliberate acts of honesty that had shaped this day. Family conflicts, I realized, are rarely about property alone. They are about values, respect, and the capacity to act with integrity, even under pressure. The day ended with a private conversation between my daughter and me on the porch. She expressed her hopes for the family moving forward, emphasizing communication, patience, and empathy. I listened, recognizing that she had internalized lessons from both conflict and resolution. Her perspective reinforced that reconciliation is not a single event, but an ongoing process, requiring continual attention to relationships, honesty, and emotional awareness. Before nightfall, I sat down to write a short note to Mom, almost as a way of sharing the day with her, acknowledging that her wishes had been respected and her guidance honored. Writing it, I reflected on how every struggle, every moment of doubt, and every carefully prepared document had contributed to a resolution that was meaningful not just legally but emotionally. It was a culmination of strategy, patience, and human empathy, a reminder that family dynamics are both delicate and profoundly important. As the stars began to appear, I allowed myself a quiet sense of closure. Not every tension had vanished, not every disagreement fully reconciled, but the core conflict had been addressed with care, honesty, and respect. The day's events left me hopeful, recognizing that the tools of transparency, patience, and integrity can restore balance even in the most fraught family situations. Mom's foresight had guided us, but our willingness to act with intention completed the circle. I glanced around the room one last time, feeling a mix of gratitude and cautious optimism. The path ahead would still require vigilance, empathy, and communication, but for the first time in months, I sensed genuine potential for lasting harmony. This wasn't just about property. It was about relationships, dignity, and honoring legacy in the most profound sense. As I locked the door and stepped into the cool night air, I knew that what began as tension and uncertainty had transformed into clarity, respect, and hope for the family I loved. Looking back, I realized the fight wasn't just about paper or property. It was about respect, truth, and the weight of promises kept. All those moments of tension, the silent judgments, the half-truths, it could have broken me, but instead it became a mirror showing that dignity isn't given. It's defended quietly, patiently, and with unshakable resolve. My heart ached at the betrayals, yes, but I also learned the strange power in standing firm, in letting facts speak louder than anger or accusations. Every hesitation, every doubt I faced led me here, to clarity, to a sense of self I never fully owned until this moment. And though wounds take time to fade, the courage to protect what's right has become a quiet strength I carry forward. If you've ever faced a moment where trust was shattered, but the truth still had a way of revealing itself, you'll want to see how the next chapter unfolds. There's a story where deception met the law head-on, and messages once hidden changed everything in the courtroom. Keep following along. What happened next wasn't what anyone expected, and it proves that even when lies seem unstoppable, clarity always finds a way to shine.